WNED-TV, Channel 17, public television in Buffalo.
Major funding for Camera 3 was provided by Atlantic Richfield Company. Additional funding was provided by the National Endowment for the Arts.
I think that again, I suppose it could be thought of as being sort of, a kind of...
shall we say, it's obviously symptomatic, I would say, sort of symptomatic of the way it's obviously the pragmatic, prehensile approach.
Yes, my first impression was I don't know quite why, but I'm sorry. No. We then go back to base again. I'm not quite sure why. Frankly, I probably completely missed the point, I would think.
I must say something. No, I'm silly.
I can't understand why anything. I can't understand the thing at all. I can't understand the empty. I can see what the things are, like chair, empty chair.
A chair.
Chair.
Chair, chair.
Hello.
Chair.
This is Chuck Jones speaking. I am privileged today to speak for Camera 3 because you are watching at this moment an extraordinary and I think extraordinarily economical animated film by one of the masters of our craft, George Dunning. During the many years that my production team has been doing in Hollywood such things as Bugs Bunny, the Roadrunner, Pepe Le Pew, George Dunning was breaking through in his own inimitable and brilliant way a new frontier of economy in his studio in London. He could be complex if he chose. He could be gorgeously complex, as you will see later in an excerpt from his film, The Yellow Submarine. But he always loved getting to the heart of the matter and experimenting with the nature of form and of sound. George Dunning died last year, but his work will never die. This program, made a few years ago by Camera 3, is now an homage, or perhaps we would say an homage, to the man that I indeed speak for animators all over the world, acknowledged as a true poet among all of us.
Who's the other one?
Someone's changed places.
This chair, faces, those faces, them faces, emphasis, emphatic, fatic.
The things in that film are about linguistics, but the fascination for me, and I think the real interest, is that it's an animated film. Film animation is simple, complicated to big story, made by artists who call themselves animators, and I am one. I studied, learned really everything at the beginning from Norman McLaren at the Canadian National Film Board. We tend to work for sponsors very often rather than doing entertainment film, telling a message for a sponsor. That keeps the industry alive. Recently, an organization from Washington, D.C., a black community-oriented organization dealing with youth problems, approached us. It's called the Righteous Apple. And they work through the creative use of the various media of drama and film, television, that kind of thing. And they asked us to do a film on drugs. 4 children, and we're at work on that now.
You, come here. You doing anything? Not even reefer?
No!
Yes.
No!
Yes.
No!
Yes.
No!
Yes.
No! 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 No!
We as a studio do a lot of work for different sorts of sponsors or clients or whatever. Advertising is a sort of major focus for animated film generally. Beyond that, we get then perhaps a longer instructional kind of film. There's a particular one that is a very favorite of ours. The National Coal Board here in England asks us to do safety films of different sorts, different subjects for miners. And right behind me here is the first workings out of a film of that sort. It's about 3-4 minutes long. And here we've got this character who's doing things wrong, and he's at this point sort of hammering dynamite into a hole. It's a film on shot blasting. Now we'll go on from this storyboard. We'll go on into animation, and in doing that, it's a matter of laying out one scene. The animator takes many sheets of paper and he draws one drawing of the character after another in progressive stages of movement, so that when they're all shot in a row, they project and give you this impression of the character moving. That's the animator's entire affair. But then after that animation has been done, we shoot lit from below under the camera. We shoot each of these drawings and get a complete finished look of the film as it will be. That is only in a pencil outline. After we're happy with that and satisfied that the action and the timing and so on is right, we then trace and paint. This is a matter of reproducing again all the drawings that the animator has done, this time with a clean pen line, let's say, on the top surface. And then we turn it over and opaque it, put color in variously on the character, so that the character is opaque and stands clear on the background. The whole thing is assembled under the camera. The background goes down, then a cell perhaps with the body, and then another cell with the head. All these various levels make up the complete setup. So that would be a setup for 1 frame or 3 frames, or something like that, under the camera. An exposure is made, and then all of these levels are changed for the next stage of movement.
We have to load up the hole with the charges. Need a bit of stemming. This must be very secure, because we don't want any trouble, do we?
There's an enormous amount of technical detail involved with animation, and a lot of labor even just making out the exposure sheets for the camera to set the levels where the characters ought to be, and all the specifications for camera work. But I think the traditional thing is a background on pegs, levels of animation laid on top of these, bodies on one level, a head on a level immediately above it, so that you can replace the head and use the body several times. And economies of that kind give you this sort of multi-level animation as it's known the world over. In fact, it's so universal that the pegs are similar in different countries, and they've all come from the American system of peg animation. There are other kinds of cutouts and different things that can be used, but I'm just talking in general about the mainstream of production. Right in the middle of the mainstream, or a little to one side, I'm not quite sure, we come to our longish film, the feature, The Yellow Submarine. And even in this, we tried a lot of experimental techniques, but we found that a lot of the narrative and a lot of the general sequences ended up with this good old standard background on the bottom, a level perhaps there for two characters, another level for another head, a level for Paul's body, Paul's head, Paul's mouth. This means that I can change that mouth easily. He happens to be talking in this scene, and then change the head and so on. In spite of technicalities and that kind of thing, I think that The Yellow Submarine is basically a very experimental film. And let me explain that enormous number of people, as far as we're concerned, something like 200 people worked on the film. There are incredible sort of talents drawn from all over the place, a big core of people here in London, but there were Bob Balser came up from Spain, and Bob Mitchell came from Los Angeles, and others from America, and it was a great sort of gathering of talents and an explosion, and that it seemed as if everybody was absolutely at the right moment in their own personal progress or whatever to just do their thing, and there was such a kind of accumulation of this sort of contribution. I don't know whether it struck you that this drawing here which is a basic animation drawing, is made up of an outline and then flat paint filled in from behind, as we were saying before, but it's the fact that just the outline is the only thing that defines. I mean, just the outline of the tie draws the tie. Just the outline on that face makes the face. And this is a kind of straitjacket, this whole business of always having all of the movement and so on described by just the outside contour of otherwise perfectly flat drawings. Well, this has been bothering me for very long. Years ago, I groped around with cutouts and all kinds of other things, trying to figure a way to get away from that outline that seems to be the common thing. And I ended up wanting to simply make a brush stroke and call that, say, the trunk of the body, put a head on it, and just freely get on from there, whatever I'm doing now. But to arrive at a character where each member, say, of the figure is, in fact, just one stroke of the brush. Now, the next time I do that trunk, I'll keep the brush in exactly the same position and try and get a similar repetition of trunks like that on different levels. In any case, this kind of experimenting, a very long time ago, brought me to the idea of painting on glass, and I did some experiments lighting from above and below, as in fact this setup here is. I painted a horse on little sheets of glass, and then after that graduated back, in fact, onto cell, and painted characters, and developed out of a story that had always been floating around in my mind. Anyway, and it turned out that it wasn't a very literal story in a way, and yet I suppose it is. It's a fantasy, it's a dream, really, and it has to do with the whole fact that so many of us dream about flying and that kind of experience. And I felt that this was a right way to be dealing with dreams in these brushstroke technique. Something happened to take me off in an entirely different direction. I read a poem of Andrew Marvell, a 17th century English poet, who I suppose is outstanding for his conjuring up of the pastoral being, things I respond to, the countryside, and images and values of that kind. And I was living in the country, weekends and that kind of thing, and I have continued to do that. And I found rushing back and forth all the paraphernalia of animation, all the peg bars and the complicated cells and so on, was making life very difficult. And I ended up with these, which are just jotting pads. And I started from a poem of Marvell, as I said, to draw images and develop a kind of visual counterpart to his poem. And in doing this, I started out in a very straightforward way, and I got a beautiful recording of the poem, and then I found out the lengths and so on, and then I adjusted my images to synchronize nicely with this whole thing. And when I got all the picture finished and synchronized it with the voice, I found I hated the voice. It seemed to dominate, and it wasn't helping us at all. And there was a daring suggestion suddenly came up: do away with the voice, just have a visual poem of some kind. And so the thing that you can see in Damon the Mower is a 5-verse setting out which synchronizes exactly with a quite correct reading of the poem, but just that the words have been lifted away, and instead you hear pastoral sound effects and things like that. I found I was in the habit of carrying these pads about and making drawings just this size. I mean, you can do that on your knee. And so I was doing an awful lot of that in the country, and a lot of the countryside seemed to come into the imagery, the animals and different things. And then, in order to shoot it, I thought, well, what could be simpler than if I took one drawing after another like this and simply put it under the camera. Then I was awfully tempted, because it is a single isolated drawing like that, to let you see the surround. So I took a bigger field so that you can see the drawing, you see the tape, you see the number up in the corner and the whole thing. And then in sort of planning this, the whole staging of that kind of picture, I found that I was awfully tempted to put another drawing there. And all of a sudden there's a kind of two-image multi-screen, whatever you call it, has happened. And I went on registering these drawings, and then at a later stage in the film, I wanted the character to move a little bit off the edge of the drawing, and I found that what I was doing was sort of relocating bits of paper and giving the character room to move, and then give him a space up here, and you'll see that happen.
Major funding for Camera 3 was provided by Atlantic Richfield Company. Additional funding was provided by the National Endowment for the Arts.